kind of the high-level overview. We've got the opening, we've got the closing. Now we're going to talk about techniques to write all of that middle.
A note before we get started. Go to d96toastmasters.ca to download the slideshow presentation and the worksheets referenced in this workshop.
And we're going to move on to the last module, which is writing effectively. George Orwell once said, "Good writing is like a window pane." And a well-written speech can be like a window pane for your audience. You let them peer through your window pane into a world they haven't seen before. And you, because it's your speech, you get to create that perspective. And as I was thinking about this and reviewing it last night, I really thought about Stefano's District 21 international speech that he won the contest with. Is he was talking about framing. And when you're writing a speech, you get to frame your ideas for the audience. And if you show them that idea through the right frame, you can really change them. And to me, that's the point. Effective writing is a great way to do that. So in this last module, we're going to talk about several effective writing techniques. And I'm hoping at the end of it, you'll find some of these useful and that you're able to incorporate them into your speech. Language itself forms the core of your speech. So you can paint a picture. And to Ganel's question, one of the things, I love language. And I think when I hear a good speaker, I'm always listening for nice phrases, good analogies, and painting a picture. So Ganel, if you can give a vivid visual description, is really effective. And the one example I have is from J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, and she's describing someone from her view. And it goes like this: a giant of a man was standing in the doorway. His face was almost completely hidden by a long, shaggy mane of hair and a wild, tangled beard, but you could make out his eyes glinting like black beetles under the hair. Sorry. So that gives you, you're not just saying there's a big hairy guy with beady eyes. You're spending a little bit more time and really painting a picture. Another example, and Ganel, thank you for leading into this, is appeal to the other senses, not just our sight, but our other senses. And the example I have here was, it's from a book called The Quality of Silence from Rosamund Lupton. And it's about an English woman who goes and spends some time in Alaska. And she's talking about the cold. Their truck gets stuck on the side of the road and the heat is not working. And rather than just saying, we're stuck at the side of the road and it's cold here, to quote her, "It's getting hard to breathe. My lungs are filling up with ants, and there isn't room for air anymore. There's a monster made of cold, hard as the edge of a pavement, coming towards us in the dark, and it's cutting through the windshield and doors and windows, and the only weapon against it is heat. But we don't have any heat." So for that, you can really feel, when you read that, when I hear that, I feel it in my chest. I start to shiver. If you can appeal to the audience's other senses, great. Now remember, a book has hundreds of pages to go into great detail. When you're giving a 5 to 7 minute speech, you have to boil that down and be really careful, be really concise, because you haven't got a lot of time. Rudimentary lexicon augments comprehensibility, also known as RLAC. What does that mean? Simple words are easy to follow. We all have access to a thesaurus in Microsoft Word or online, and it's great to show off what $25 words you can come up with to solve a 25-cent word problem. Remember, it's not about you. You're not there to show how smart you are. You're there to communicate something to your audience. And so make sure that you do have a balance of simplicity and words that really describe what it is you're sharing with the audience. Active versus passive voice. And I know all of you were sitting this morning thinking, I hope I get a grammar lesson today. And a Sunday afternoon grammar lesson. Well, here it is. And it's a pretty simple one. Most sentences in the English language have a subject, a verb, and an object. And the subject does whatever the verb says to the object. And in active voice, it starts with the subject and says the subject did this to the object. For example, the storm snapped the trees. The storm comes first, it's doing the snapping, and the trees are the object. Another way to say that is in passive voice, where you put the object first. The trees were snapped by the storm. Passive voice is not bad. It emphasizes the action, but most of the time in your speech, if you want to be immediate and impactful, make sure you're using active voice. The storm snapped the trees. It's a lot more compelling. Last one, anchor phrases. Anchor phrases, that's a word or a group of words related to your theme. It's directly related to your purpose. And you repeat this periodically throughout your speech to reinforce the theme. All right, Aristotle, back a couple of thousand years ago, Aristotle came up with 3 modes of persuasion, and it's a nice way of looking at a speech. The first mode, ethos, and this is the credibility and the character of the speaker. So if you're giving a speech to someone, if you can build your credibility and make yourself believable, then your audience is much more likely to listen to you. You can do that with a good introduction. You can do that by sharing a personal story that tells people a little bit about your values. You can do that by being vulnerable, by telling a deeply personal story that will bring your audience in, and they'll recognize that this is a truthful person. They're coming in and being honest. Second is pathos. And this is where you build a connection to the audience's emotions. We talked about this a little bit in the section on opening. You want to quickly get that connection through the speech structure. You don't want to lose that connection with good writing. You can continue to maintain it. And so developing a connection, neuroscience tells us that if you can appeal to people's emotions, then they are going to maintain that engagement. And the last one is logos, or logic of the argument. And although we think we make lots of logical decisions as humans, we really make emotional decisions and justify them with logic. But a really good speech has some ethos, pathos, and logos, and typically you do them in order. Starting with ethos, convince the people that you're credible, connect to them emotionally, and then give them the logic of the argument you want to make. Now, if you thought you were just going to get grammar today, there's a little bit more you're going to get. And this is some of those things that I haven't taken an English course since high school, but I do remember some of these things. Connect concepts. And we talked a little bit about this in trying to connect an abstract concept or explain an abstract concept to someone. Use a simile or a metaphor or an analogy. A simile is where you're comparing two things using like or as. So if I say, you know what, doing this is like shooting fish in a barrel. Well, if people can imagine that it must be pretty easy to shoot fish in a barrel because they can't go very far. So that's telling you that task is really easy. Metaphor is even more direct. Rather than saying this is like something, say that it actually is. So there's a quote from one of the Shakespeare's plays: all the world's a stage and the men and women are merely players. That's from As You Like It. So really he's saying that life is just like a big play, but he's, rather than using like, he's saying directly that that's what it is. And the last one is using an analogy. And again, this is making comparison. So for example, if I was to say, that's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. That's an analogy to say, whatever this thing you're doing, it's kind of a useless task. The Titanic sank, so didn't matter how the deck chairs were. Next up, adding sound effects through alliteration, assonance, and onomatopoeia. And by the way, I will point out there's a link at the bottom of the slide here, 6minutesdelugan.com. Andrew DeLugan he's from Victoria. He's got a little website with all kinds of public speaking tips, and a lot of the material on this particular slide came from him. You can read more about it there. So alliteration, onomatopoeia, and assonance, these are all things that make the language come across a little bouncier, a little more interesting and rhythmic to listen to. And that's a great way to keep your audience a little bit entertained. Alliteration is just starting a sequence of words with the same letter. And another Shakespeare example from Macbeth: fair is foul and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air. Starting that many words with F's and having a couple of F's in the middle just gives it a little bit more bite. Assonance, instead of using consonants at the beginning of the word, you can use vowel sounds. And so my mother, I remember when I was a kid, used to sing, "The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain." If anybody has ever read a Dr. Seuss book, he uses these. His writing is so bubbly and so bouncy and so rhythmic. And that's one of the things that always made it effective. And the last one, onomatopoeia, that's just a word that sounds like what it means. It could describe an animal sound like the howl of a wolf, or the meow of a cat, or the buzz of a bee. If you're talking about lightning, you wouldn't say the lightning was really loud. You would talk about the crack of lightning, or the crash of the lightning, the boom of the thunder. All of those things get the audience's attention. They bring them a little bit more into the speech with you. Say it over and over and over. Repetition is a great way to reiterate points and just emphasize them. And if you go to Andrew DeLugan's website, he's got some examples, and there are different names for different types. There's one called anaphora, which repeats words at the beginning of phrases. And if you can think back to, if anybody's ever heard Churchill's speech leading up to World War II, uses anaphora. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And so just the "we shall fight" here and here and here and here just emphasizes his point. Another type is called chiasmus, which is a little bit more complex, and it's kind of repeating, but not quite. It's changing it up. And so the famous phrase, quote by John Kennedy was, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Again, there's repetition, but he has changed it up a little bit and changed the meaning. Last one, triads. Count on the power of 3. And back in my younger days, I was very into photography. And if you look at photographs, one of the things they tell you to do is always try and make the most interesting things in the photograph along the dividing lines of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And people often find groups of 3 really, really effective. It's the Romans recognized it. There's a Latin phrase, omni trium perfectum. Every set of 3 is complete. Mentally, if we hear 3 things in a row, it just feels like that's the right number. It's when you get the 3rd one, you know that you've come to the end. And so if you can find 3 subpoints to your point, or your speech has 3 very concise points, it can be very effective. All right, time for an exercise. And I think your worksheet has some ideas. What I'd like you to do is look at the elements you plan to use in your speech and go through the different speech writing techniques that are listed there and see if you can incorporate 1 or 2 in order to make the writing in your speech a little bit more interesting. Great, let's move on and talk a little bit about humor in your speech. Humor is a great to relax your audience, helps them enjoy their speech, puts them at ease, and it makes them more open to your ideas. It also, I find, even if you have a really serious topic, people will see the range of emotion. So if you've made them laugh a little bit, the more emotional and downsides of more difficult emotions, they feel them more because they've moved from happy to sad. You may bring them back up to happy again, but just giving them a good range. How funny is categorizing what's funny? 2003, a psychologist named Rod Martin wrote an article in a journal of research in personality, and he classified 4 kinds of humor: affiliative, self-enhancing, aggressive, and self-defeating. A group of stand-up comedians found Rod Martin and told them what they thought about his article. One type of humor you can use is physical humor. You can use exaggerated gestures and movement. You can use voice. You can, project voices, or if you've got a bit of dialogue going on, change your voice, and you can make that really funny. Just practice it a little bit, and you might find that it's a really effective way to get people's attention. Another one is hyperbole, which is exaggeration. And I've used this when my kids used to ask me if they could have a ride to school. I told them that this was my walk to school when I was a little kid. It was 20 kilometers through a snowy mountain pass. And what happened is I went uphill in the morning, and because of the rotation of the earth, it was uphill on the way back. So hyperbole, if you're describing something in your speech, hyperbole is a great way to get a laugh. Just make it so much worse than it actually is. On the other side, you've got understatement. And if anybody here is a Monty Python fan, they probably recognize this scene where King Arthur has a fight with the Black Knight to try and get over a bridge. And first he cuts off the Black Knight's arm, and the Black Knight says, "Look, that's just a flesh wound. I'm going to keep fighting." And King Arthur gradually cuts off all his limbs, and the poor Black Knight is still down there arguing that he wants to keep fighting, and Arthur's a chicken for walking away. So if it's 45 degrees out, you could talk about how it was a brisk morning. Just use understatement, and you can provide a little bit of humor. Another one, if anybody remembers Gary Larson from the 80s, he was great with incongruity. So this is put 2 contrasting concepts beside each other, and just that incongruity that it doesn't make sense. And there are actually 2 in here. 1, we've got cavemen and a microscope, and 2, he's using a microscope to see the mammoth. It really is come up with a concept and then put something that is really, really strange beside it. Steve Martin had a nice comment once. He says, I gave my cat a bath the other day. He loved it. He sat there, he enjoyed it. It was fun for me. The fur would stick to my tongue, but other than that, it was great. And so again, giving the cat a bath, there's incongruity there. Another one, wordplay, also known as dad jokes. Don't use these on your teenage kids. They don't appreciate them. And they can come out off as groaners a little bit, but in the right context, wordplay is a lot of fun. For example, I might say, you know, I used to call the toilet in my house the John. I was going to call it the Bob, but I decided to call it the Jim, because that way it sounds really good when I say I go to the gym for an hour, first thing every morning. Last one, observational humor. And stand-up comedians are amazing with observational humor. They'll just look at the world through an unusual perspective. And I'm going to give you an example from Jim Gaffigan on Just for Laughs.
And I am what you would call indoorsy. I'm surprised we can still get people to camp. Hey, want to burn a couple of vacation days sleeping on the ground outside? No. What if I told you get to crap standing up in the woods? I still wouldn't want to go. You'll wake up freezing, covered in a rash. All right, I'll go. My wife always brings up, camping's a tradition in my family. Hey, it was a tradition in everyone's family till we came up with a house.
Okay, so Jim Gaffigan, he's just looking at something as simple as camping, and he's making a play just looking at it from a completely different perspective, and he gets a laugh out of it. Now, 1998, Craig Valentine won the Toastmasters World Championship, and I happened to take a course that he gave last summer, and he had lots of great ideas. A couple of things. We all have inner thoughts, and usually we don't share them, and sometimes for good reason. But if you can share what you're thinking inside, it can be really, really funny. Second, if you can predict what your audience is saying, say what they're thinking. And quite often, if you have a well-crafted speech, you can lead them along and you can kind of guess what, if I say this, that's the next image that is going to come into their mind. Start talking about that. Great way is to use dialogue back and forth with people. It can be really effective. Use present tense so that it's very immediate. Use the rule of three. Quite often you can use that rule of three to say, here's one thing, the next thing, and make the third one really, really unexpected. Last piece of advice from Craig Valentine, create a story file. So when you think of something funny or think of something that you could use in a speech, just write it down somewhere, build a little file, and over time, you will have a treasure trove that you can draw on for some of your future speeches. A couple of caveats with choosing and delivering humor. Know your audience. First off, do it on purpose. So make sure that the humor you provide is related. Your Uncle Frank might have gone to a wedding and said something really funny after having a couple too many drinks. If that doesn't have anything to do with your speech, tell it at the break, but don't tell it at the speech. Remember in Module 1, stay on purpose. Also in Module 1, know your audience. What's funny varies from person to person. Nowadays, we're pretty sensitive about certain topics, and it's not about what you find funny. It's, remember, just what's in it for me. Think about the audience. Will they find it funny? And if they won't, well, don't use it. Little technique, end the sentence on the funny, then pause. And if you were listening to Jim Gaffigan, he talked first about, I'm what you call indoorsy. And the humor is in the word indoorsy. That's the last word in the sentence. Try and arrange your joke so that the last word is really where the funny comes, because it draws people in. Then you can pause, gives them a bit of time to process it. The other one he used was, everybody used to camp until we came up with the house. And again, the house is the part people are laughing at. It came right at the end of the sentence. What happens if no one laughs? One approach is to repeat the punchline in a sarcastic tone, glare at your audience, but that probably won't help. If nobody laughs, move on. Just keep going. Some of them might have an internal chuckle, but don't repeat it. One of my, there are lots of good comedians out there. I don't know if people remember The Tonight Show when Jay Leno was doing it. And I used to like some of his jokes, but afterwards, he would repeat the punchline and explain it. And that just lost it for me. So please don't mansplain the punchline. Just deliver the punchline and off you go. So our last exercise before we wrap up this session, go to your worksheet, take a look at adding some humor in your speech. Think of a couple of techniques that we've talked about. Let's come back and we'll have a couple of closing thoughts, but effective writing, I'm hoping that you have been able to take away a few effective writing techniques. And secondly, that some of those techniques can be used in the speech topic that you brought today. I'd like to kind of wrap up here. What I will say is I presented lots of different techniques here. No one is perfect in every speech. And what works for you might not work for everybody else. It really is an art, not a science. We've talked a little bit about having a strong purpose, getting a clear opening and closing that relate to your purpose, and that purpose is something that you want your audience to take away. It's for them, it's not about you. The structure is a nice way to move your audience along through your speech so that they don't fall off and you don't lose the connection you built in the opening. And writing effectively just adds flair and interest to your speech. So I'm hoping you will go forth and change the world, because right now we need more voices, not less. And I'm going to leave you with a quote from Maya Angelou. Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with deeper meaning. And as Toastmasters, you can be that voice. So please go forth and invoke change.
That's the end of Module 4 for Bring a Topic, Lead with a Speech. This concludes this workshop presentation. If you'd like to record a section of this presentation or a version of it, please reach out to us and we can add it to our channel. We look forward to you using this in future. While you're here, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment below to tell us what else you'd like to see here.